studio again. Changing it up as always. I am Eric. That is Dave right there on the other side of the screen.
I thought it was boxed. Where did I go?
Oh, you're right there. No, you're right here. Don't worry. Don't worry, Dave.
Okay. Just want to make sure I existed, you know?
Yeah. Do you want to just try this over again?
No.
Okay.
No. We're not perfect, so why try to be?
Yeah. Well, welcome to the scoop, anyways, guys. And we have a lot of show to do today, and we want to catch up with some of the more recent things that have been going on in the world of sports and elsewhere. And Dave, let's just start it off with Major League Baseball. We're not quite to a quarter yet, but we're just finishing up the first month of the season, and we have some surprises and disappointments, I guess. Some things we expected, some things we just did not expect. And again, we had our predictions early on in the season. We actually had a segment a couple months ago where we talked about some of the key teams that we were looking at for that had expectations to kind of deliver this year. And of course, the obvious ones, the New York Yankees, and we'll get to that in a minute. I mentioned the Padres. You mentioned the Blue Jays. But we got to the first, let's say, about 25 games in, depending on whose schedule you look at. And I guess we'll start with the obvious, the New York Yankees. Not to say it's a horrible start, but it's a horrible start. Right now they're sitting 10-13, fourth place in the division. Obviously, still very early in the season. Cashman's kind of came out and said that it's still early. The team is going to get on a nice run, not hitting the panic button. But Dave, at 10-13, what are the things the Yankees are doing, or I should say they're not doing, that's kind of forced them to be in this position at this point?
I mean, it's a lot of things, but, here's the thing. When you're a franchise that's very well known and just in general, it's widely known that they have a lot of money and they like to use it and they like to spend it on players and home runs and, guys like Garrett Cole who are supposed to be strikeout machines. And because honestly, outside of him, overall, and there's been pieces here and there and games here and there where some guys have stood out, but overall, outside of Garrett Cole, it's been a mess.
Yep.
It has been a mess all around the board. They can't score. So even in the games where Cole pitches great and we only give up 2 to 3 runs, we find a way to lose 4 to 3. And so there's just a lot of work that needs to be done. We need to solidify the bullpen to come in and help our starters. We need to score runs. We need to stop relying on the home run ball, Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge. It starts with getting on base. DJ LeMahieu, Brett Gardner, like some of these, Clint Frazier. These guys have to get on base. Aaron Hicks was horrible to start the season, and just like a lot of these guys need to get going, and I think they can. The season's longer this year, so there's plenty of baseball left. But just the way they started, you were being nice. I'm gonna be candid here, man. They have been horrible.
Yeah. For
the expectations, because expectations had them being a strong playoff contender, if not World Series champion. And based on those early predictions, they've been horrendous.
Yeah, Dave. You said 10 wins so far this season, and again, not where you expect them to be, especially Boston, sitting 15 right now, top of the division.
Yeah.
You mentioned Garrett Cole, and you mentioned outside of him, and I look at the pitching staff, I look at the pitching numbers, and it's kind of a mixed bag on the pitching side. As you said, Garrett Cole's 3-1 right now. He has second most strikeouts in the league and fit with 50 right now. Has a 1.71 ERA, so obviously he's doing what he's been advertised to do. You go down the line here, Kluber 0-2, has a 4.15 ERA, Domingo Germán 1-2, over a 6 ERA. And so, you look at those numbers from the starting pitching side, definitely nothing impressive. But you're right, Dave. The problem is about the offense. It's you go top to down, and maybe outside DJ LeMahieu, you are seeing, what is becoming, what's wrong with some of these, with the baseball mentality in terms of offense. And it's always been kind of driven home by, how Cashman's been trying to put his team together, is about trying to create power lineups and trying to hit the ball at the park to win games. And the reality is, Dave, is that that's only going to work maybe 3 times out of 10. to win games in baseball, even at the pros. Doesn't matter if you're pro, college, high school, whatever. Fundamentals are really important. And, it's just about driving in runs, about getting on base, stealing bases. I mean, Dave, you look at these numbers. I mean, they're 27th right now in runs scored. They're 28th in batting average and 28th in slugging percentage. I mean, for a supposed power lineup, you should not be... Now, I mean, again, swinging, you're going for the fences and understand if your batting average is down, but at least if you can hit home runs, your slugging percentage will go up, and your number of runs.
Something Gleyber Torres is supposed to be doing, and he hasn't hit a single one.
But Dave, you could point to 7 guys in that lineup that
Clint, Gary, Aaron, even Gio, and outside of the home runs, and he only has 6.
Yeah, and I said, I think about Brett Gardner, and again, he's been, a long time Yankee. He's always found a way to stay in pinstripes, even though he's always been looked at as a potential asset in some sort of trade or just, easy money to free up. But, he's never meant to be necessarily always been a strong home run hitter, but he does his part, I think, to kind of get on base. And like I said, DJ LeMahieu, and those 2 guys, I think, for the most part, you expect to kind of do that more fundamental kind of approach. But like you said, the rest of these guys, it's just... And it's not as easy, Dave, as flipping a switch and saying to them, okay, well, stop hitting for the fences. Just try to get that single, get the double. It's the mentality, Dave. It's the mentality of these guys that they're big, they're strong, they're powerful. They've been taught to hit the ball deep, and we've seen injuries. Now, the injury bug has not really caught them this year, so far, knock on wood, but in the end, you still get the same almost, issue here. It's just you're a team that just is devoid of any ability to play fundamentally to actually win these games. So, I mean... they played Tampa, I think 6 or 7 times this year. They pretty much have not shown up against Tampa. They're ahead in the division. You mentioned Toronto's a team that might surprise in the division. Their pitching is actually so far what's been holding them up pretty well. They're 4th in ERA in pitching, sitting 500. But we'll mention the Boston Red Sox, and we just talk about offense, Dave. What the Yankees are not doing offensively is what Boston is doing offensively.
Yeah.
They're 1st in batting average right now. They're tied 2nd in runs, 3rd in on-base percentage, and they're 1st in the league in slugging. So I mean, they're covering all their bases, no pun intended. They're getting the job done offensively.
Yep.
Again, pitching obviously, we'll kind of see how that shakes out. A lot of people thought Boston was going to be in a rebuild year this year, and again, still in April. We'll see, sometimes, a lot of times these teams that start off at the gate pretty strong in April, they kind of fade back when you get to May and June, and usually, I'll say this, Dave, with the Yankees, it won't be the first time that they came out of the gate slow and then picked it up in May and June as the weather got warmer and their bats heated up.
Sure.
If they can stay away from injuries, if they can find ways just to squeak out, a little more on the ground instead of trying to hit the long ball, I think they'll get themselves back into the thick of it. But I think we highlighted a few weeks ago, Dave, is that the AL East is not a division to take lightly. It's not like the Yankees are just going to be given this division, because you have 3 teams clearly ahead of you that have something to provide that will make them a threat.
Right.
And I don't know, Dave, anything else you want to add to that about the AL East, but I'm not panicking yet, but we gotta obviously keep them under the microscope here.
Yeah, no, for sure. They're one of the bigger disappointments so far.
Mm-hmm.
A little shout out though in the NL to at the moment the Mets holding their own with a half game lead in the NL East.
Yeah.
Brewers in the Central and Dodgers in the West. I'm expecting San Diego to make a climb at some point during the season, but right now LA and San Francisco are holding their own.
And you remember, Dave, I said a few weeks back, the team that I mentioned was the Padres. And I mentioned the Padres because, Fernando Tatis Jr., and some of the other big names that are in that team right now, Manny Machado. But the pitching is actually what's helping the Padres kind of keep themselves relevant now. The NL West, Dave, I mean, we talk about the AL East being a stacked division, but the NL West is probably even more stacked because, Colorado, you never know Colorado, but I don't think this is going to be their year once again. We'll take it, take a grain of salt, but you look at San Diego, Arizona, San Fran, LA, and you look at, again, small sample size. We're still in April, only about 25 games played, but But one thing that's interesting to me is is the pitching. It's not so much their offense, it's the fact that they're stacked in the pitching categories. San Diego Padres first in ERA and first in strikeouts in the league. Giants are second in ERA, and you have the Dodgers who are third in ERA and second in strikeouts. So I mean that's three teams right there who are on top of all of baseball. Delivering just knockout pitching performances. Obviously, Dodgers with Kershaw. But we think about the Giants, and you have Anthony DeScalfini. Do you know how to say his name? 'Cause I've never heard this guy before. His name is Anthony DeScalfani.
Descalfani, yeah.
And you have Kevin Guzman. And these are and they so far have actually led to I believe a league low 77 runs in April, which is pretty good. And they're also holding the league to a league low 206 batting average again. So, the Giants, we kind of been putting them in rebuild mode for a while now. But they may have something to say this year. And like I said, with Padres, you have Joe Musgrave and Yu Darvish kind of, making, strides right there. So that's the division to me that is going to be the most interesting and the most competitive moving forward. I don't know. Do you agree with the NL West, or do you think there's another division that might be more exciting?
No, I think that's pretty appealing as well across the board, and I'd agree. So, yeah, I think that's pretty. For me, that's going to be one of the more exciting races as well.
Yeah, and again, we're Yankee fans. We don't necessarily always think about the NL a lot,
No,
but
for sure.
I mean, West Coast style baseball. I mean, I don't know if that's West Coast style, is what we call it, but it's just there's something about these five teams that always provide, just bring their A game. And like I said, the Dodgers. I mean, you look at the Dodgers and the Yankees, Dave, and they're kind of like mirror images of each other. They have big payrolls.
Yep.
They they go out and spend big when necessary. But the Dodgers at least appear right now to have it all together, fresh off their World Series. The pitching is great, and and the hitting for the most part is holding up pretty well. But yeah, I do like the NL West. I mean, I guess if we had to pick, I know it's really early, Dave, but I mean, I would still say probably the Dodgers. You give them the edge at least for now until you can see something otherwise. But you could see two wildcard teams come out of the West.
Yeah, I could absolutely.
I'm not picking on Arizona here. I mean, they're kind of in the mist too. I don't see anything with Arizona that makes me jump excited for them right now in that stacked division. But that's why we love baseball, Dave. It's the parody of it is is to be reckoned with. So, but yeah, we'll wrap it up with baseball. A lot of exciting stuff, a lot of season to play, and we'll see if the Yankees can make it happen. But it's up to you, Dave. If you want to take breaks or not. But
nope, absolutely not. No, since we're only doing a few,
we'll just keep going through it.
Yeah,
we'll just keep going through it, and let's change it up. We'll go to the National Hockey League now, and we're in the final home stretch, I guess, of the NHL season. It's been very exciting. As a Ranger fan, your mood is probably a little bit more down in the beginning of the year. I know mine was, but lately they've definitely picked it up. Coach Quinn did have COVID. He was gone for 6 games, and when that happened, of course, the Rangers won 4-2. Since that time, they've seemed to kind of picked up some steam, but they were really far behind, Dave. And we talk about competitive divisions. I look at the league, and obviously we have the reorganization for this year only, and we have the Canadian division, but you look around, and I can't think of a more competitive division in terms of top 4 teams than the East right now, because the Rangers, and this is what's so mind-boggling to me, Dave, is the Rangers. They're 7-2-1 the last 10 games. They actually have one of the best goals. They have the 6th best goal differential in the National Hockey League, and they're still 4 points behind Boston. With Boston 2 games in hand. for that Final Four seed. And Boston's a great team. I mean they are a very exciting team. A couple of years off a Stanley Cup final appearance. You know, they're always considered one of the favorites. They're fourth in a division. You know, that just they're a solid team that. I'll put it this way, Dave. If Boston wins the Stanley Cup final, I would not be surprised. That's me. That's how good the that Eastern Division is. And so the Rangers right now, I mean, you've just seen how many goals they've scored in the last 10 or so games. Mika Zibanejad is actually leading the team right now with 20 goals, if you can believe it, after the slow start he had. And yeah, I mean, do the Rangers really have a decent chance to catch Boston, or even I guess the Islanders would be the other team that they probably could catch? But I mean, as much good as they've done, what kind of shot do you actually give the Rangers to catch them?
Great shot.
Really?
Yeah, dude, they have 2 against the Islanders and 2 against the Bruins. It's in their hands.
It is in their hands. Now,
it's absolutely possible. They shouldn't lose any of the other ones. I mean, 1 or 2 losses could really put them in some trouble. But mathematically, with 2 against Boston and 2 against the Islanders, they have a real shot.
Well, their final 6 games, Dave, are teams above them. So they have
the Capitals.
So they have the Capitals twice, the Islanders twice, the Bruins twice. Now the Islanders, I believe they get both games at home. I believe so. They get both games at home.
Yep.
And then the Capitals. Islanders actually in away. And then they get 2 games at home against Washington, 2 games at Boston.
Let me just tell you this: we sweep the Islanders this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
We're 1 point back, no matter what Boston does.
I mean, Dave, of those 3 teams, which team do you think the Rangers are going to have the? I won't say easy. It's not easy, but which sweep is more likely?
Islanders this weekend.
Yeah, and because again the Islanders and again they were in the conference final last year.
Never said it was going to be easy. You asked which one was going to be easy.
So,
yes.
I mean, Barry Trotz, has his team, ready to go.
Yep.
But they have fallen off a little bit. They're actually 4-5-1 the last 10 games. What was once kind of a comfortable lead near the top with Washington and Pittsburgh. Now they're kind of falling behind Boston. And, if Boston kind of gets ahead of them, which Boston does have a game in hand, only 1 point back. So, the Rangers, Islanders, yes, this is... I'll say this, Dave. If the Rangers sweep the Islanders, I will give them a legitimate 50-50 shot that they can somehow in the last 4 games against Washington and Boston put together. Because in my mind, with Boston having 2 games in hand, I don't think they're catching Boston. Even if they were to sweep Boston those last 2 games of the season, I think with the 2 games in hand that Boston has, I don't see them being 4 points out with a potential sweep in that final weekend. Now, if they sweep the Islanders, obviously, like you said, they'll be 1 point back of the Islanders, and then it's really up to the Rangers. I say, if they can go 3-1, if they can somehow maybe sweep Washington, which they've actually been very well against Washington this year.
Yep.
And if they can just maybe split against Boston, because both games are in Boston, and it's hard enough to win 1 game in Boston, let alone 2 in a row. But if they can, somehow put together 4 wins against the Islanders and Caps, and maybe sweep the Boston, that's the only path that I see them sneaking in. I don't see Pittsburgh falling off, obviously. I think Washington's too far ahead. But that's my path for the Rangers. So, it's... you're giving a pretty good shot right here, Dave, that they can run off, against top 3 teams in the division to make the playoffs. I say, well, let's see where we are after this weekend.
Well, of course,
because if they can sweep the Islanders somehow, which Islanders give them fits, Dave. I mean they give them fits. They definitely, even when the Islanders were not good, they still managed to give the Rangers fits when the Rangers were good. So
sure.
It's hard to flip the script here and then say the Rangers can go in and take 4 points.
My overall point was that it's in their hands.
It's in their
it's theirs to win or
right,
lose.
Dave. It's mathematically it's in their hands if they win all 6 games, which
they're in the playoffs.
Not saying things can't happen like that, but there is a lot of parity in NHL. It's very hard. If they were somehow to win 5 of their next 6 games,
I think they're in.
4-2. Things have to happen
because of 4-2 is sketchy.
Anything less than that, I think we'll just kind of wrap it up right there.
But to say, like you said in the beginning, to wrap this up though with NHL, to say that we're even having a discussion about playoffs for the New York Rangers is a feat in and of itself.
You know, Dave, I want to just go on a couple of things here with the Rangers, and I'll be quick about it. You know,
It'll take a long time.
We'll take a long time, but you know, Dave Quinn, and I think you asked me point blank in an episode, you know, is Dave Quinn the guy? And I kind of came out and said no.
Yeah.
And you know, I think at the time a lot of people were feeling the same way, and obviously you can be emotional about it,
of course,
because you know the team's not performing well, and there was just this feeling that. And my thing about Dave Quinn was this, because you know, you look at his approach, his style, his game style, his approach to the game. And my feeling was that he does not have necessarily a bad approach to the game. I think he has a very great coaching style that he applies to the game. But in a professional league, you have to make adjustments. You have 2 intermissions, 2 opportunities in game to make adjustments.
Yep.
And my thing with Dave Quinn is that he was not doing a great job of seeing his opponents that came at him and making the right adjustments. Because we've seen, I think it's very clear, Dave, when we saw some of these like 8-3 games against like Philadelphia.
Yeah,
we
9-0.
I mean, Dave, I love this roster top to bottom. It's a young team. It's an exciting team. I mean, you know, people are saying that Panarin, you know, is, you know, the greatest offensive asset the Rangers may have ever had. I mean,
Mika's caught fire too.
You know, Mika Zibanejad. I mean,
he had a slow start.
You know, he had a slow start, but we saw last year. We see this year. You know,
Alexis Lafreniere
and Lafreniere. I mean, he was off to a really slow start, and again, we kind of chalked it up with a little bit of, you know, obviously he's young. He's not even 20 years old yet.
Yeah,
he's gonna have to get familiar with the league. But there was just this feeling that you want to see some of these rookies that are considered high-priced possessions get off to a good start.
Sure.
And he was not doing that. He just was not getting off to a good start. Same with Kapokako, who, you know, had a year under his belt. And so there was the feeling that with Quinn was that his approach to the game was working, but he was not making the right adjustments, and he was not giving his young players, his young stars, opportunities to really execute offensively.
Yeah.
And there was concern that he was going to inhibit growth from these players moving forward, because these are potentially your next big superstars for the Rangers. Obviously, you know, you have Panarin right now and Zibanejad, but if this is the start of a potential dynasty, those are your 2 main assets that you want to see develop and become star players. Right. And so that was my feeling about Quinn, was that, is he the guy that's going to, you know, make those players those kind of star players?
Yep.
As we get to the end of the season, and obviously they're winning more games now, it seems like, and I hate to say this, Dave, but when Quinn was out for the 6 games with COVID, and they had a Knobloch from the Wolfpack.
Yep.
I mean, the team just seemed looser. They seemed just more free.
Loose.
They just yeah. I mean, they just and to me it was not a coincidence the team went 4-2. They had those blowout games against Philly, and so to me, when you have that kind of talent under your wings, just let him ride. Let him be, you know, let him make mistakes, you know, let him ride, but don't try to, you know, micromanage. Don't try to, you know, change things up, you know, with their style. And, you know, the only knock I would have against Quinn in terms of can he be a Stanley Cup contending coach is he needs to do a better job making in-game adjustments, because I think that's ultimately what will inhibit the Rangers moving forward. I'm not saying we expect the Rangers to be a Cup team this year. I think we thought maybe they could sneak in the playoffs, which is kind of where they are right now. They're kind of trying to sneak into the playoffs. And there's a feeling that if they get into the playoffs and they have to face a Washington or Pittsburgh, it's not going to be a fun series for the home team. But Dave, that's kind of my thought about Quinn. And again, like I said, I was more pessimistic. I think you were a little more optimistic and more patient, if I recall. I mean, do you still hold that belief that Quinn is going to be the guy moving forward?
Oh no, I'm patient with the team. I'm not patient with the coach.
Mm-hmm.
Very big difference.
Okay.
I can take wins and losses. As a UConn fan and as a New York Jet football fan, losses are in my... I'm used to losing. What I get sick of is how you're losing and why you're losing. Mm-hmm. Is it organizational decisions, GM decisions? Are you losing because of the product you're choosing to put on the field? Are you losing because the players are not as invested as they should be? Why are you losing?
Yeah.
So you're gonna, and if you know, Dan Quinn, I'm sure he's a great guy personally, but I don't know if he's getting the job done per se as to give him another opportunity or more opportunities to be the head coach of the New York Rangers. I don't know.
Yeah, they have the 6th highest goal differential right now in the league.
6th
highest.
Yeah.
And you think for a team with that kind of goal differential, they'd be solidly in a playoff position right now. But ultimately, it's a slow start, Dave. That's going to cost them this year.
Sure.
And, you know, what I don't want is even if they don't make the playoffs, but they finish, like you said, like they go like 4-2 or something, and there's a feeling that this team finished on a high note. We don't want to get a false sense of hope that the team is going to be off to the races right away, because I think there was a feeling before COVID, before the bubble tournament, that they were kind of getting this together, and then they got swept by Carolina. Carolina's a good team, so we get that. But yeah, the Rangers right now, they have they're the number 6 in total offense. They're number 8 in actually team defense, if you can believe it. So I mean, in terms of goals allowed, per game. And the power play is still kind of their weakness, but that's the Rangers team for you. Always weak in the power play. 6th best penalty kill. But and Adam Fox. I mean,
having him back.
Adam Fox. I look at him like a Brian Leetch, to be honest.
Yeah, no, because he's great.
Well, if there's one thing the Rangers have lacked, in my opinion, for the last 20 years, it is a solid scoring defenseman.
Yeah.
And they try to plug things in, Dave, like Keith Yandel, and a few other names, but you just never felt like they had a true consistent goal scoring or just point scoring defenseman.
Yeah.
But Adam Fox has 42 assists right now.
Yeah.
In a shortened season,
right?
Which is pretty fantastic.
Sure.
And then you go to get Panarin and Benedetto. So I mean, top to bottom, this is a super exciting team.
Sure.
This is a super exciting team, and you don't want to see that talent go to waste, because they are players, they're on contracts, and salary cap's always an issue.
For sure.
You don't want to blow that window of opportunity. So.
Yeah, another quick shout out here. We got just to kind of so we're not only covering Rangers, just in this is quickly. So in the Central, we have right now Nashville and Dallas battling it out for that 4th spot. I don't see Chicago catching them, so it's going to be a Dallas-Nashville race to the finish line. In the Central, in the North, I believe the top 4 are solidified. I think Montreal is still. I think technically no one has been mathematically eliminated, but I don't see anyone really fighting for that 4th spot outside of Calgary, who could make a run, but I think they truly need to win out or take 5 of 6. In the North, and then in the West, we have I think the Blues. I think the Blues will ultimately come out and take the 4th spot, but right now Arizona is fighting them tooth and nail. So it'll be an interesting couple of races to end the year.
Hey man, I look at the top teams, and to me the favorites right now. I mean, if I had to pick, maybe 2 or 3 teams, I think you go Vegas.
Yep.
Colorado.
Yep.
And I would say Carolina. Now Tampa. I mean, they're defending Stanley Cup champs, but I mean, you think about Carolina last year and the year before that. I mean, they were in the conference
fake
final.
Whalers.
The fake Whalers, yeah. It's always after they leave their hometown they go win a Stanley Cup. Quebec, but Carolina, they've definitely been in the thick of it.
Yep.
For a while, and Tampa won last year, but I mean, Rob Brennamore has that team playing.
Yep.
I mean, it's loaded at the top. Tampa and Florida. I mean, Florida, for God's sakes.
I know.
Yeah,
they've had a good year.
I still maintain the East is still a more competitive division.
Top to bottom, I think so too.
Bottom.
Outside of Buffalo,
but to me, you got Vegas, Tampa, and Florida. I'm sorry, not Vegas. I'm sorry. Carolina, Tampa, Florida.
Yeah.
I can't flip a coins as 3 teams, but I would say play a rock paper scissors kind of game, because I mean, easily one of those 3 teams could represent the Stanley Cup, could win it all even.
Sure.
I might give Carolina a little bit of the edge, even though Tampa has the benefit of the doubt being Stanley Cup champions. But I would say those 3 teams, and if I had to pick a dark horse, I'd still say Boston. Because I just think something about Boston, Dave, and even as New York supporters, it's just there's something about that Bruins team that they can just get, and they lost Chara this year, but if they can just get hot at the right time, they are, to me, a tough team to knock out. In NHL, you don't play series in the season. You just, we've been playing some back-to-backs, but, you don't play a 7-game series in the season. And so you play a game against a team, you move on. But then in the playoffs, you get to tune in on one team for a 7-game series, and Boston's just that team, Dave. I'm like, can you really beat this team 4 games in a row? Because I look at Boston as a team that they can just focus on one team. They can figure out a way to get you. They still have a lot of those core players. Patrice Bergeron. You have Pastrami as they call him. And Rask, if he just get himself in the right mind frame, I mean, he can be a shutdown goaltender. So I mean that's to me some of the teams. But yeah, I'm excited. Whether the Rangers make it or not, I'm excited for the playoffs this year. we'll keep an eye on it.
Yep.
Go Rangers, but I look forward to it.
Nice. So what's on tap for the final topic?
So final topic, Dave, and let's just talk about. Well, let me ask you.
For today.
We'll talk about. Do you want to talk about NBA or do you want to talk about WNBA? Maybe not so much WNBA, but you want to talk about women's sports. Or you want to talk about NBA?
Let's touch on women's sports a little bit.
Women's
here.
sports, and Dave, I'm glad you brought that up because and again, I don't want this to be super controversial.
No, of course
but
not.
I think we want to have a very honest discussion about something that happened a few weeks ago. Megan Rapinoe.
Rapinoe.
Is it Rapinoe? See, this is why I have you, Dave, because you can correct me when I make these mistakes. Megan Rapinoe.
I got you, Megan.
You got. Obviously, probably the most famous U.S. soccer women's player.
Currently, yeah.
Currently. Kind of went back and forth with Draymond Green for the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, that was a mess.
And again, I'll admit, Dave, I didn't get the full details.
You don't want to.
But I really don't want to. But basically, there was kind of this back and forth about, and Megan Rapinoe, she's always about, and as many women athletes are, trying about, equity in sports, or, just trying to get equal pay, equal exposure.
Yep.
And, one of the unfortunate things is that, when it comes to equal pay, it's a very sore subject because the reality is that male and we'll take the WNBA and the NBA for example. That's probably the clearest example we can look at in terms of a full season. Is that the WNBA players, they get paid a fraction of the money that an NBA player does.
Yeah.
And you look at an NBA player, and I mean, they're averaging, they're obviously pulling in millions of dollars a year. Even not the stars. I mean, the stars like LeBron, obviously, like they're pulling in 8 figures, maybe 9 figures over the course of their career. Yeah. And you got female players, probably making maybe 6 figures. Not even, maybe like $200,000 a year or something like that. So there's obviously a very clear discrepancy between the salaries. And so, and again, I didn't get into a lot of the specifics, but basically, Draymond Green kind of came across and said, she's basically complaining without much basis.
Right.
But more so what he's really saying is that, if you're frustrated with it, do something about it. Do something about it.
Easier said than done.
Do something about it in terms of, getting exposure to the product, getting fans in the stands. Because ultimately, Dave, I mean, I am obviously all for equality between men and women.
Sure.
But the numbers, they just do not add up. I'll give you an example, Dave. So the WNBA brings in $60 million revenue approximately each year. It actually costs them $70 million to operate their league. So they're operating on a $10 million net loss each year they're playing. And so the NBA is actually what's keeping them afloat for the most part. Kind of subsidizing the difference and being able to pay those players. Now, they're saying that if they were to pay WNBA players, now it's a smaller league, obviously, there's less teams.
Sure.
But they were saying that if they were to pay these players equally based on number of games played, stuff like that, they would have to take a $30 million loss. Basically, they would have 50% more expenditures than their actual revenue.
Yeah.
Now, NBA, $7.4 billion revenue industry. And they're bringing in about maybe $2 billion in profit, and the other $5.4 billion obviously goes to to both player salaries and other categories. So I mean, and it's not to say that again that you obviously want equality with men and women's sports, but
most people do. I don't think that's the issue.
The financial piece of it just is what it is.
Yeah. It's unfortunate, but
and so now, if you want to say now, who do you blame if you're Rapinoe? Do you blame networks for not giving you more coverage?
Sure, if you could do that, you could blame the fans.
You
could blame
fans, but how do you blame fans?
Well, that's my point.
How dare you not watch us?
Well, it doesn't say there's logic to it, but you can blame whoever you want.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it right. Yeah. But I think ethically, the equality thing. Because here's the thing. More money can be found. Mm-hmm. It's the whether or not some of these people want to actually go down that route and invest their time and money into helping that product succeed.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who are willing to, donate to the NBA or whatever their local team and buy season tickets and whatever, and that ultimately helps the bottom dollar. Whereas oftentimes we continue to ignore women's sports from the aspect of being entertained. Not that we don't want the women to have equal rights. It comes down to, I think a lot of people just still, we're slowly, welcoming that idea, because for so long, so many people stayed away from it because there was no, and this is what the thing, this is why I don't blame the fans. I don't blame her for being pissed. She has every right to be upset, 100%. Because again, we saw back during March Madness when we briefly talked about this, the women's to men's weight room that was given to them by the NCAA, and how quickly, it was 100% a joke, but how quickly was that rectified?
Because again, public publicity. I mean, you don't fix that. You let that linger. That might do some more damage than good. So my overall point is this. There needs to be a way to get exposure, because ultimately I think that cures most things. Exposure cures a lot of things, and we need to grow up also, unfortunately, and some people are going to hate to hear this, but we need to grow up taking our kids to women's games. We need to, instead of just, pounding it in their heads that, it's about the men, it's about the men, it's about the men, because culturally, that's, as a man, we're going to grow up being just naturally, our eyes are going to be towards what we were conditioned to find entertaining. So I think it also starts with, again, and that doesn't mean, do I blame kids for at a certain age ultimately starting to stare at the screen a certain way versus another? No, and you can't control that, I guess. But what you can do is you can increase exposure, and that starts at home. Maybe I'm expecting a son in about a month. Introducing him to women's sports at a younger age and showing him, look at that player, and look what she can do. So just not only exposing him to the men's side of things and the men's games and football, but taking the time to show him what these women are doing. And hopefully with time, that'll help our perception of women's sports also. And it'll lead to a lot more men and boys following, which is what we want. Exactly. But again, that fan side, there is money to be found to help with them getting exposure. There is. Yeah. So, I know you said the NBA is running at a deficit. Sure. Mathematically, I get it. Because economically, I understand the numbers. Yeah. Totally get it. But there is ways that I don't think we've tapped into yet to help the women expand their voices and get people watching them more. Because the entertainment argument, to some aspect, to some degree, is kind of BS. It makes sense to some degree, but again, I could talk for hours on it. But well, Dave,
because I don't know. Yeah,
I'm sorry, Dave.
I just want to end this here by saying I think there's more that could be done to help them, and I think there's more that can be done. Just increasing their exposure, and hopefully that'll end up helping. Yeah. Because there's still a lot of people out there, and I can attribute some of this to also just the idea of culturally. I look at it as, away from this argument. Baseball, a men's sport. Why are they losing so many fans? As the fan ages and it gets older and older, and so you look at why aren't the youth and why aren't young people going towards baseball, and that's a man's sport. So you know what I mean? Well, what aspect of these games are not attracting and other
Dave,
people?
You're hitting it right. It's all about fan exposure. It's about the tools that you put in place to expose more people to your product. Sure. And so the example I want to use, Dave, is UCONN, particularly with the women's basketball team. Yeah. And obviously people now they look at UConn women. They've won 11 national championships. Yeah. And they're just known as the standard of women's basketball. Right. Even though they haven't really won a lot of championships in the last few years, they're still considered the standard. They didn't get there by accident. It's not an accident. For sure. Obviously, and again, you say, okay, well, they have a great coach in Gino Auriemma, but you ask Gino, I mean, he, the university plays a big role in getting UConn women's basketball to where they are today. It really does, because Gino can sit here, he can coach, and he can get these players to play hard, but he had to go through the iterations of getting the university to put more funding into women's basketball, getting better facilities. I mean, he was talking
absolutely.
about how when he first got there, I mean, they were playing in the Army field house, while the men have better facilities. I mean these are legitimate starting points, and Gino could have sat here and just complain and say it's not fair, but I think what ultimately helped Gino and the UConn women's team get to where they are today is I mean, obviously they have to push.
Sure.
But the most important thing is the product.
Yeah.
Put out a product that makes fans want to go watch. Because, in 1995, and again, the team was definitely building up from when he first got there till their first championship. But when they won that championship in 1995 and they went undefeated, you had on full display quality women's basketball product. And since then, he's made it his mission to... And when you have this domination over women's basketball like he has, people say, "Oh, it's unfair." It's all the great recruits. Like, well, yeah, but because he has all these recruits, because he's a fantastic coach, because he's checking all these boxes, he has established this high standard for women's basketball.
Right. A
product that people actually want to watch.
Yeah, dude, I watch it.
And it's forced other programs in women's basketball to elevate their game. And in a way, even as a UConn fan, I like to see UConn women win the championship.
Yeah.
But when they don't, when they lose, I know it's not because necessarily that the UConn's women's team is declining. It's because these other programs have actually gotten to their level.
Or close to it. Yeah.
And that tells me that what Gino's done is he set a standard for this team that other teams have to come out and match.
Right.
Find better recruits, develop players better. Make the game more exciting.
Yep.
All these things really add up, and so, that's all it comes down to. There's some things, obviously, they're out of control.
I know.
And those things are unfortunate, but, I look at ESPN, they cover women's basketball like crazy. It's there. It's there for the taking. And even though there's some unfortunate things that still go on, to say that you haven't advanced women's sports in the last 20, 30 years. For those who are opportunists like Gino, to make it more advanced,
it's a false accusation.
I mean, let's be honest, Dave. I mean, when the UConn men were not doing so great, with Kevin Ali after winning their championship, it was more exciting to go to a women's game. I was going to more women's games than I was going to more men's games because, that was, when they had when they were ranked number one, and they were bringing in, during their 111 game win streak, and they would
Brianna
bring in
Stewart
and they would bring in the number 2 team in the country, whether it was Louisville or Stanford. I mean, those were the games.
Yeah.
And I mean, Gamble would fill up for a woman. To see Gamble fill up for a
women's game on a Wednesday night.
On a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
I mean, that's saying something.
Absolutely.
And so
100%.
And so to kind of wrap it up, Dave, with Megan Rapinoe, it's understandable to be a little frustrated, but ultimately, what's most important is that you focus on the product. Focus on making your product the best it can be. And let everything else come into place, because ultimately that's the problem here, Dave.
I know.
Is that you can't, money does not grow on trees. But if you build the product, it's gonna start bringing more money your way. Gino, UConn today, they now have the basketball facility, state of the art, men and women, but it was this. I mean, you want to talk about equality? They designed a symmetric basketball facility on campus, so that men's and women's had equal, down to the square foot of practice space. That's not an accident. That's the result of hard work, building your product, building your brand. Yeah. And that's the end result.
Speaking of, just to kind of touch on that note, and I know we can sometimes be homers and biased, but I think UConn has done a relatively, and obviously there's issues in other regards and how they handle certain things, but I think as a university overall compared to others, I think they've done a really good job at what you just said, trying to integrate the equality. And obviously they're going to struggle from here to there, and there's stuff going around now about the rowing and all that jazz, and not being able to find money for that program, even though they did a lot of private fundraising for that school or for that program. But I think overall, I think they have a lot of people in place that are fighting for the overall, what we're talking about, the overall goal here. And I'll kind of end my, my somewhat.
Well, Dave, it's an important topic. I think we felt the need
to
really dissect it a lot.
I don't ever want to be distasteful, and I don't ever want to come across, no matter what my opinion is, I don't ever want to come across like I'm, belittling someone or something when I know very little internally, because at the end of the day we're fans here. We're not inside sources, or we're not in the locker rooms and stuff like that. But when we're talking about sports, I want to try to be as neutral as possible, because I don't. And by no means am I typically a PC guy, but just from the standpoint of here, like, with regards to this, there's not a lot of personal take. It's, there's going to be times and topics when we talk about things that we have more connection to and more personable or personal opinions to, or when we have a guest, maybe they can share more in depth. But like when it's just me and you kind of, just kind of spitballing stuff, I don't ever want to feel like I'm, being that guy. But at the end of the day, because like when I say stuff like, the math makes sense, and like economically and from a business standpoint, like, yeah, like it makes sense. It does, yeah. But I don't ever want that to come across like I'm still this, that like
I said, Dave, it's a controversial topic, and there's always going to be backlash about it. But
of course,
we've outlaid a perfect example with UConn about there's a lot to control here.
It is.
And just know that it's nothing set in stone.
I know.
So,
so anyway, so that's I think. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up for this week?
I mean, watched the Knicks-Nets game a couple nights. No, sorry.
Yeah, I'm doing. Speaking of which, because I know that
Knicks-Suns game. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, speaking. I just the Knicks, man. What the heck?
I mean, we'll talk about it more next show.
Yeah, because I really want to talk about the Knicks next week.
I mean, we've talked about Knicks on and off, and we've been kind of waiting. I think we were kind of waiting for Dave to kind of like fall off a little bit somewhere, and then just as they were I think they were 25 and 27.
Yep.
And we're kind of like, oh man, they're gonna fall off the wheels a little bit here because they were losing some games, and then they just reeled off 9 games in a row, and they almost got 10. They had a game against Phoenix, but Phoenix is a really good team.
They are.
It's gonna be.
Well,
I mean, I'm very excited, Dave. And again, up until a couple years ago, I really was not watching NBA that much, and obviously the Knicks help with that.
I've always watched. I've just lacked the drive to be as invested.
But it's more. It's to me, there's more teams. I feel like for the last maybe 5 or so years, it was Golden State Warriors and LeBron James.
I know.
And that's and for 4 years, that's kind of what it was.
Sure.
I feel like now, and again, LeBron's coming back with the Lakers, and we'll see if Lakers are probably more competitive again. We expect them to be a threat. But there's still 4 other teams, I think, you can argue, in the Western Conference that could represent the West. And the Phoenix obviously is one of them with Chris Paul. Utah has lost Donovan Mitchell, but they're obviously a threat, number 1 seed.
Yeah.
And of course the Clippers. But even the East too. I mean, a lot of it's Philly, Brooklyn, and I don't know. As a Knicks fan, can't get my head around Brooklyn as a basketball team. Brooklyn likes to be represented. But I
can't. We'll dive way more into the Knicks next week.
But yeah, the Knicks have about 10 games remaining. They have a very tough schedule ahead of them.
Yep.
So by the time we discuss this team again, they have 2 winnable games coming up against Houston, Chicago. They have to win those games. The rest of those games are against playoff or play-in teams, I guess is what we're calling it. And 6 of them are on the road. So they have a very tough road trip coming up. So, we're going to find out if it's, if it's fool's gold with this team. Because this 6-game road trip against really 6 of the best teams in the West, that's going to really say a lot about where this team really is. Did they get a little lucky? Did they get a little too hot? Or are they going to be justified for being kind of in that 4 to 5 spot? Because if they have a bad road trip, if they kind of, there's a scenario, Dave, where they can go 2-8 the rest of the way. Because they have,
like I said, we're going to dive way more into it next week.
So they could fall to 500, which would probably drop them to that playing game, and so we'll see. But yeah, I'm very excited for the Knicks. We'll see where they are. But yeah, we'll end it right there, Dave. It's been a fun show trying on your setup. We'll make it better as we go along, as always. But this will conclude the scoop today. I'm Eric. That is Dave.
Take it easy, guys. Yep.